Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Curious Mondays. This is our weekly dose of inspiration from Hyper Island. For those who may not have met me, although I doubt that, hopefully, my name is Yeng Wai, and today I'm going to share with you just something I'm really curious about, and it has to do with designing for thinking. Like, how do we turn people who are just yes man, like yes, 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 or yes woman, yes, 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 and to people who go yes and no, I think something else like that. So I'm going to be hoping to give you something that can maybe spark your thoughts. And I'm going to be taking obviously examples from Hyper Island, but before that, what I would like to share is where is this whole idea coming from? So um, a while ago, I was reading Adam Grant. I think Adam Grant came with his latest book called Think Again. It was really, really popular, and some of you may have read it. But the one thing which I read in that it really struck me was when he said, most of us take pride in our knowledge and expertise and in staying true to our beliefs and opinions. But then that makes sense, right? That makes sense in a stable world where we get rewarded for having conviction in our ideas. But he goes on to say that the problem is that we live in a rapidly changing world where we need to spend as much time rethinking as we do thinking. So when I read this, I was really, convicted. I was like, hey, yeah, fully agree with that. Especially, at Hyper Island, we see so much of that change happening, and we talk about it so much. And I said, yeah, this is definitely something that is going to be very, very powerful. We need to spend as much time rethinking, kind of challenging the stuff that we think about. And a lot of it actually starts with us, right? So if you are not familiar with this, have you done this quiz? I'm not sure whether you've done the quiz. Have you done the Thinking Again quiz? He's actually got a quiz, so it's really funny. I think that's how he sells his books. He writes the books and then he has a quiz, and then you go to the quiz and you take it, and then you get kind of interested in what he's writing about. So I'm going to get all of you to do a quiz, okay? And I'm going to put the quiz link in the chat. So let me just copy the link. And what I like you to do, okay, is I like all of you to just take a moment. You got to open this link, ideally in Safari. I tried opening it in Chrome, it didn't work for me. So if it doesn't work for you in Chrome, try opening in another browser. Open this link, and I'd like you to take the next 5 minutes or so doing this quiz, okay? He's going to give you some answers and let you to take note of the result from the quiz. And then when you're done, come on back, okay? Let us know in the chat when you're done. So hit the link and go to the quiz, and I'll wait for you. Just stop sharing while you guys are doing that quiz. Some of his questions are interesting, but I think what's more interesting are some of his options that he gives you. Hey, Sophia. See that you just joined us. We're currently doing a quiz, okay? As always, at Hyper Island, we like testing people. So I've just put a link in the chat. And if you could, just head to the chat, the link, and work on that. Hey, Edsel, I see you just joined us as well. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Yeah, I just placed a link in the chat, and like I was saying to Safia, who just joined us, as with Hyper Island, we like to do quizzes. So hit the link and open it up. It works better for me on the Safari browser, but see we get it open in the Chrome. Hit the link and open it, and it's a 10-question quiz. It should take you about a short moment, 5 minutes or so. And for those of you who are done, let me know if you're done. All right, thanks. Okay, James is done. Cool. So, James, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy a link, and I'd like you to share it. Okay, so put it there. Head to the Mentimeter poll, and I'd like you to share your results. Now, if you look at your poll, what I'd like you to do is to tell me the results that you got from the quiz, from this Adam Grant quiz, okay? So if you're a preacher or a scientist or a politician, kind of, tell us what you've done. Okay, so I'm going to see whether you guys are polling the quiz, or telling us what kind of a thinker you are. Thank you, Dave. So go to the Mentimeter link and break it down for me, right? So, so for example, if you are like whatever 10% preacher, then put 10% here. If you're like 20% prosecutor, and so on and so forth, you can do that. Okay. Thanks, James. Okay, so two-step process: do the quiz, then get the result, and then fill up your answers in the Mentimeter poll, so that we don't all know what James's answer is. Because so far, it's the only one who's done it. Okay, got more people coming in. Thank you. Okay, good. I'm just going to share my screen. And hey, Eddie, good morning to you, Eddie. We've just started this sharing session, a bit of a quiz. Don't worry about it. I'm just going to show the results of it right now. And yeah, here's the breakdown of all of us in this space. Okay, so Adam Grant's book talks about these types of thinkers, or the ways of thinking, right? There's a scientist, there's a preacher, the politician, the prosecutor, and of course the other. Yeah, it's the average, right? The average. So in this case here, based on all like 5 people who responded so far, it's quite good. I'm happy to know that we have more of us have, an average, high average rate, where more of us are more like a scientist and then a preacher and so on and so forth. But what does it all mean, right? What does it all mean? And for those of you who have not had a chance to read this book, I'm just going to share a bit more now. So when Adam Grant talks about the different ways of thinking, he talks about how, it kind of shapes the way then we therefore respond, okay? And it's the way we think which we need to kind of assess again and kind of say to ourselves, okay, is this the right way to think? So he's got the 4 big groups: the preachers, the politicians, the prosecutors, and the scientists. And I love these kind of Venn diagrams, right? Where it's basically, there's some similarities between the preacher and the politician, in which they often act on faith alone. Or like the preachers and scientists, where they often wear monotone uniforms. I really love this diagram. It's really, really funny. But the crux of it is that when Adam Grant talks about the preacher, what he says is that when we go into preacher mode, we deliver sermons to protect our ideals, right? So we have a certain set of beliefs and it's being challenged, and then we go into preacher mode and say, no, this is not how it is. We protect it and we promote it. We kind of don't take, don't take anything else for that. So there's a preacher mode of thinking. When we go to the politician mode of thinking, it's all about winning an audience. We campaign, we're looking for approval. We will say whatever things we're going to say so that we get people on our side. And it means attacking the other side. It means saying stuff that we may not necessarily have any evidence for, but that's how politician mode thinking looks like. Then you have the prosecutor mode. And the prosecutor mode is where you are, and I think this is probably more of my head. I think I read this head a bit more unconsciously, where you see the flaw in someone else's reasoning, and then you're out there to prove your case. Like, nope, sorry, this one, nope, no, doesn't make sense, no evidence, da 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 da. You're just kind of finding every argument to prove people wrong. But I think what Adam Grant is saying, that instead of any of these three modes of thinking, we should really try to be more like scientists. And as a scientist, he's saying that when we are in that mode, we're actually searching for truth. And we search for truth, we run thought experiments or we run real experiments, and we're all about testing hypotheses. So we may have a certain point of view, but we're ready to change that or to validate that or to find evidence, and through that process, discover knowledge. So thanks for doing this, doing little exercise. When we see that we can be in any of these modes, then obviously the big question is, well, how do we design for thinking? How do we design for thinking within our teams so that your team will start to think more like scientists and less like preachers, prosecutors, or a politician? And I'm going to use HyperIsland obviously because that's the background that we have. And I want to show you how, in the process of the MA and all the different things we're doing, how we have actually created a culture and environment to allow you to think more like scientists. And the first of which is that we have a certain method to our madness. So some of you who have been to our facilitation course will have seen this model. It's called the process design model. All it simply says is that whenever we design stuff, there's always things we start with, like we create a certain setting, we open up, we create some structure, we may set some agreements on how we will meet together before we dive into what we call in the middle here, the spaghetti. Okay. And in the spaghetti, here is where sometimes you get to do stuff, build stuff, work together, give you ambiguous tasks, and you kind of challenge yourself through that. You get a chance to kind of have a bit more self-management. And this all happens in the spaghetti. And then after that, we make close, we kind of tie down, land some of the learnings and things like that. But when we are trying to design thinking for your teams, I'm going to argue that there are these at least minimum four things we should take note of. The first of which is the need to create psychological safety, the need to, or at least the role of psychological safety, and the role of learning or thinking by doing and making, the role of nuance and complexity, and maybe most of all, if you're the one leading the team back in your workplace, the role of the facilitator, someone who is facilitating that kind of thinking. So what does this look like when we're running this at HyperIsland? Well, how do you create safe spaces, right? And I think psychological safety is a well-discussed term by now. I don't have to talk about this, but we all know that feeling when we're in a place where we feel safe to express a question. I mean, the last master's module, we decided to do a no stupid question campfire, right? I mean, Andy would know this. And the whole point was creating a safe space for people to ask questions and to just, I don't know about this. Can you tell me more? I need to think about that. You could do it through a few ways. You could do it through an I Do Art, which is a tool that we have in the HyperIsland toolbox. And many of you have gone through this. We use this very often. But what we actually do in HyperIsland is that at Way Week, right, we get you to share personal stories. That personal stories is one way to create that openness and psychological safety, right? And this is from Crew 9. So thank you, Crew 9, for this wonderful times, and also Crew 8 and Crew 10. So by sharing these personal stories, by using I Do Arts, we're essentially setting up a structure and a way of saying, this is going to be how we want to work together in this space. We create a safe space for thinking. So the role of psychological safety is really important. The second is this is one more example I thought I'd put it in, which is the DBS example. Some of you may know this, right? The idea of the raccoon and how they use a raccoon to surface like people who want to point out, risks, or want to point out, problems or weakest links that they see, or bottlenecks or anything else. This is really important. But there's also a role of learning by doing. And I mean, HyperIsland, again, is a big proponent in building and in prototyping and materializing. And the whole reason is because it helped to inject curiosity. Inject curiosity into the whole making. Oh, I wonder how we can do this better. Or I wonder how it would look like if we do something like that. And it forces us to think about what we actually know and what we don't know. So doing is a big thing. If you think about in your context, how does doing and making look like, right? How does it, what does it mean for your team? Is it something you can tinker with? Is it a Miro board you can play with, right? Think about ways in which you can encourage building and creating. That's going to play a big part in helping people to think clearer and think more like a scientist rather than just accepting at face value. The third role I'm going to share about before that, is some pictures from Brunei. So there we go. And that's what I'm talking about, right? So we got you guys to play with like augmented reality, just to try. What does it look like to build something, right? To make something. And I'm sure you learned a lot through that process in terms of ways of thinking around how the technology works, or how to even think through a certain journey or an experience. I need to share screen. Okay, can you not see my screen? You guys able to see my screen?
Sorry, Yeng Wai, no.
Yo, yes.
I think you have two monitors, so is that the other screen, is it?
I can see
Yes,
myself.
I'm the only one. Okay, got you. Got it. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
No problem. So yeah, thinking by building something, okay? Very, very interesting way of trying to introduce thinking more like a scientist. Just try and build it. The third is in the spaghetti, when you're facing a really challenging question, you're facing a really challenging context. I think we have to see the role of nuance and complexity. And here are some of the thoughts that I would have whenever it comes to dealing with complexity and dealing with nuance. I want to avoid simplistic conclusions, right? I want to look for the friction in one's thinking. Because if it's too simple, it usually does not reflect reality. Reality is a lot more complex than it is. So I'm always trying to avoid simplistic conclusions. Now, simplistic conclusions does not mean that we do not have something we can summarize, but rather in that process, we want to make sure we've been rigorous in thinking through it. So we want to follow the money, right? Sometimes we say that in HyperRun, follow the money, right? Where is the money? Where are people, willing to invest in things? Where are they willing to spend? That gives you an indication of where to think or what people are doing. So follow the money is one way you can introduce nuance or complexity. Who said it first and in what context? Understand the provenance, understand the context, understand the historicity of something that's being said, the social cultural environment in which something was being said. And this is important when you're starting to look at, maybe ideas that were taken from times past. And in what context were those ideas first mentioned? I mean, now we're talking about the metaverse. It's a really big topic, a really interesting topic. But the metaverse was first introduced some decades ago. In what context was that said? How do we understand that today, right? Who said it first? Who is citing their work, right? So whose thought shoulders are you standing on? And those of you who are writing IRAs and writing IRPs, that's something we keep telling you as well. When you're thinking about the work that people are doing, they all has there's always a certain history of thought. And it's important to embrace that nuance and complexity when thinking about that. Then obviously you go to the other side, right? What are the critics saying, right? Don't just look from one side of the picture, but the other sides. What are the critics saying? How wide is the gray area perhaps, right? Make it wider if you can. In fact, that's what Adam Grant says. Gray areas are usually too narrow. We're going to make it wider. And lastly, maybe if you're more data-driven or evidence-driven, well, look at the data. What is it telling you? Is it reliable? Can you trust the data? So all these ways are ways in which you introduce the role of nuance and complexity into your team's thinking, right? Challenge them, suggest that you can maybe think a bit wider, make the gray area a bit wider. These are different things you can try and do. Because I guess the last thing you want is for this to happen, where people are very led towards very simple but wrong conclusions, and they're not willing most times to take on the complex but tough but right kind of conclusion. So I really encourage you to not go to the left, but go to the right, okay? Because often the simple stuff, the simple conclusions are usually fraught with overly simplistic conclusions. And I guess I'm just going to quickly round up my sharing with the last consideration, which is your role. Okay, so you're the role of a facilitator, you're facilitating a meeting. You are the one, having to kind of encourage a team. there's some positions or postures that I would encourage you to take. And the first is to develop confident humility, where you recognize that knowledge is just so wide now. Not everyone knows everything about everything. And so team is everything. The other thing you role model is curiosity, all right? And to lead with psychological safety. So that's a big thing that you can do. So be open, you model vulnerability, we use reflection, we ask open-ended questions, but we try to enlarge the gray. Enlarging the gray through the questions we ask or through the reflection, points you want to have, that is actually something I feel we could do more of, right? How do we help people to enlarge their gray? Use questions, which I think you were in the last Curious Monday session, we talked about that. So go check out that video if you haven't seen that already. All right, so these are just some thoughts I've been having around how to design for thinking, right? So the role of psychological safety, the role of doing stuff and building stuff, introducing nuance and complexity, and of course, the role of the facilitator in trying to design for better thinking. And I'm quite certain if we start doing that, we're going to turn yes men and yes women into the yes and, where they're able to build on and think better, more like scientists and less like the other types. So yeah, that's my simple sharing today. So just gonna leave it here. Whether anyone has any thoughts about that, I'd love to hear your questions. And we're gonna have a bit of a Q&A, a bit of a discussion. So if you want to stick around for that, you can. If not, I'm sure you have other things you might be on to. So feel free to drop off the call if you need to, and we'll see you next week.